What's up, guys? It's Nicky P. I'm back with another training video for Upswing here. In this one, we're going to go over a hand from a live stream where the guys put on a double straddle. So everyone's stack gets cut in half twice here. So if they started with 200 BBs, now they threw on two straddles. Now they're 50 straddles deep. So things changed quite dramatically. And we're going to talk about the pre-flop dynamics here. Then it ends up going multi-way. It goes four ways to the flop and turn. And then Doug and Ginge end up in a little bit of an interesting spot that I wanted to check out. I thought it'd be cool to look at in the multi-way solver a little bit. You can find a lot of straddle ranges in my new course, Smash Live Cash, along with an extensive multi-way section where I go over a bunch of different multi-way mechanics, some of the things that I think are really important and some of the things I think are more feel-based and are more exploitative based. So stay tuned for that. That's coming out really soon. And let's just get into this hand. So like I said, we got the double straddle on a variety of stacks, but most guys had around, 40, 50K, which would have been 200, 250 BBs. Then with the straddle, with one straddle, it would have been, 100 straddles. And now with the double straddle, it's 50 straddles. So chips are going to start flying here. And let's just get into it. So JD, he's first to act after the double straddle. That's going to be a pretty tight range. That's probably supposed to just be like ace jack, king jack, queen jack off. A classic kind of like under the gun 7 type of range. Maybe like a king 8 suited, king 7 suited, queen 8, queen 9 suited, jack 9 suited, 9 10, 10 8 type thing, 8 9 suited, all the suited connectors you'd expect. And then maybe like 4s plus. As stacks get shallower here, I do think that they should tighten up quite a bit and maybe just fold some of those small pocket pairs. But these guys definitely play looser than me, or looser than I think they should in a lot of spots. They really like to mix it up, and sometimes they're not getting punished for it, so it might just be a good adjustment. So it does fold now to all the way to Doug, and he's in the big blind, so just one removed from the straddle here, from the first straddle. So he's got queen 10 suited. He's got two guys behind him. He really shouldn't be playing too many calls at all here, but it didn't look to me too much like he thought about playing a heavy 3-bet. I would be 3-betting this hand most of the time in my range most of the time. In the straddle games, the good way to think about it is just that we're one position earlier than we normally are. So if you're low jack, treat it like you're under the gun 7. If you're hijack, treat it like you're low jack in terms of your opening range. So we are facing a pretty tight range. What do I want to do as Doug? I don't really want to play that many calls, but you can get away with it just because the big blind and the straddle probably don't squeeze as aggressively as they're supposed to. Doug probably perceives himself to have some post-flop edge here, so I don't mind calling. And in order to figure this out post-flop, I just kind of give Doug like any sort of hand that has a semblance of calling at equilibrium. I'm going to give him having it, like 25% of the time or something, because I feel like he's just going to take the same shape that is able to call and just call it a little bit more for the factors that I said, because he thinks he has post-flop edge, because he thinks he's not getting squeezed as often. But it is hard to overcome being out of position against 2 or 3 players for the entire rest of the hand. But his hand's too good to fold. But part of the reason we do like playing that 3-better fold strategy in these positions is just because there's so many players behind you. It's really, really tough to realize your equity. It's tough to make good decisions post-flop. It's just a tough spot in general. So after he calls, then we've got Ginge in the straddle, first straddle. So Ginge wakes up with a hand that's pretty much always going to call, and he does. And his range would be squeezing, something like 9s or 10s plus, ace jack off, 9 10 suited, jack 10 suited, suited broadways are going to be really aggressive there. And then he was going to be overcalling hands like his 10 8 suited, the lower suited aces, all the way up to, ace 10 or ace jack suited, maybe even up to ace queen suited. And the pairs 2s through 8s probably don't want to put any more money in. And then finally folds to the double straddle. So he's going to flick in the call with the 8-9 off. That's probably about the worst hand that he should be calling with here. he's probably going to be folding, even some suited stuff. No anti-games do play tight, so he probably wants to be getting in there with like a queen 5, queen 6 suited, jack 7 suited type, maybe the 10-7, 10-6 types, all the way down to, 8-5, 7-4, 6-3, 5 deuce. And then the offsuit 10s are about the pip that he's going to go with pre-flop there. And squeezes very similar to what I said. Yeah, suited broadways, ace jack off, nines plus or so. At this point, he can even start, if they're all just 40, 50K effective, he can start ripping it in there because there's so much money in the pot. He might just want to shove something like ace king off, pocket tens, king jack suited type stuff. But that's not going to happen, which is what makes Doug's call just completely fine. Now we get a king 10-9 with a flush draw, and that flop checks around. So at this point, king 10-9 flush draw, that in position player should be super, super aggressive. Here's a screenshot of his multi-way strat. You can see very, very little checking. Just wants to check exactly a few pairs that are under the 9. So king 10-9, of course, pulling checks from pocket 8s, pulling checks from 7s. If you can't see here, our blue is check. So very infrequent check spot. Mixing two different sizes, the very small bet and the medium bet. So that's 12% pot and quarter pot. So when you're four ways, you can utilize this really small bet on a board like this when your range kind of has everything and target those guys because they have a really difficult time defending when they're all out of position, especially the smallest blind and the big blind. They're going to have a tough time. So you can get away with just betting like, 10, 15% pot, clearing out a lot of equity. Really effective strategy, and players tend not to battle as much against it. They don't defend properly enough just because it's such a tough spot to defend. So you can use that tiny size. You can use a more comfortable size if you're more used to betting quarter pot here. But in any case, the point is this in position play is going to be a really powerful play with a small bet and clear out a bunch of equity. The in position player does check here, so I think that's probably an indication that he's playing the spot too tight because he had ace jack, and ace jack pretty much bets every time. But not to say that that's necessarily that bad. He's got that gutter. He's got that gutter where if somebody catches up, he can win a huge pot off of them. So I don't mind the check. I'd rather check something that has an easier time continuing on turns, just because, he's got no backdoor. So maybe I would just check with a diamond more often or something like that. But in any case, he does check it back. And like we said, you really just want to build your checkering range around, the pair of nines, the lower pairs. That's most of your checks. If you have nothing or you have a piece of the board, you can kind of very happily put money in when you're in position against three guys. And there's not much the guys that are in between you can do in that sandwich between you and the final straddle. So it does check through. And now Doug is faced with a decision where he has to bet into three different players. So that big blind range in a live game is going to be probably much too wide. It's probably going to continue a bunch of the offsuit gap stuff, like 4-6 offsuit, 6-7, 8-7. I've watched enough of these streams just to see that guys don't really like pitching those when they're getting that price in the straddle. Some of the guys, the reason that they put that double straddle on is just so that they can overcall this spot. So you get there, they get there really wide, and you're betting as any other player in the hand probably clears out on a board like this a bunch more hands than it should, just because they should be more condensed towards the stronger suited stuff, folding the worse suited stuff, and then just having like the offsuit 10s plus in terms of offsuit stuff like Jack 10, Queen 10, 9, 10, and then probably still just folding like 8, 9, 8, 7, 7, 6, and then just calling like 5, 4, and 6, 5 because they're so good multi-way. So I think that this bet from Doug, even though he is allowed to bet anyway at equilibrium, I think he can probably just overdo it here because he's up against ranges that are a little bit wider, which on some boards would be bad for Doug, like if they did connect with all those low offsuit connected stuff. But in this one, when it's really high, and really the only player that he should have had to worry about range-wise is the in-position player, and the in-position player checked back when he had a very aggressive flop strategy, and he should have a very aggressive flop strategy because as we saw and as we talked about in the beginning of this video about the preflop ranges, the suited broadways in general, from all the players in the blinds and straddles, should have been really aggressive to either 3-bet or squeeze. So those flatting ranges should be really pair heavy. They should be suited ace heavy, the low suited ace X. So this should have been a really good board for in position. If he checks back here, maybe Doug correctly identifies that he's unpaired with something like exactly what he has, like an ace-jack offsuit type hand, ace-jack no backdoor maybe, or he himself could have an underpair. He decided he elected not to bet, or just a 9x. In any case, Doug has a really strong hand, and he's going to try to clear out some other hands that he may be free rolling, and also get some value for when he makes a hand on the river. I think he can just do both things here, of course, and as you can see, his range does mix up a lot. The only hand that wants to bet pretty much every time is pocket fours, which makes sense. Queen Jack is doing a lot of slow playing. His hand is going to mix both. So he does decide to put in the bet, and he goes for the big bet size, which is not full pot, but our medium big size. And his range wants to just bet small or medium big. So looks good so far. So he goes for about 70% pot. Ginge just calls, and then both the other opponents fold. So Ginge's range here, he does perfect. Blue is call, green is fold, pink is raise. His raises are just going to come from some of those nut flush draws, queen jack, a little bluffing frequency with queen 9, 9-8, because he wants to raise his pocket nines and his 9-10, and a little bit of that 5-4 flush draw and pocket fours. So pretty simple strategy for Ginge. He's just continuing with really good stuff. Doug bet into 3 people 4 ways. So both these ranges should be really tight now. And we should really be thinking about river play as Ginge. And he ends up doing a really good job. I wonder what he would have done on some different runouts. But in terms of Doug's range now, if we go back and see what he's going to have available to him on bluffs on a bunch of different runouts, he's going to have stuff like ace of diamonds, jack, ace X with a jack of diamonds. He's going to have a little bit, you can see he's starting to bluff a little bit with some of these pocket pairs that have the low diamond, like pocket fives, a little bit of a frequency with pocket sevens. But for the most part, right here, he's got king, queen, king, jack, king 10. So all of those top pairs with the gutter and the straight blockers, or just 2 pair, or he's got a hand like his, like pair plus flush draw with queen 10 or jack 10, 2 pair with the 9-10. So it's a really strong range. He's got some ace queen suited betting in there with his the diamonds, but he's not going to have that pre-flop very often. I just gave him all these hands that I think he might be mixing calls with, but that's pretty generous to give him quarter of the time. You give him ace queen suited. So I think what's more likely here is that Doug has some offsuit ace X bluffs, mostly just ace jack, and then he's going to have it a lot, have a hand like his when he doesn't have it. I'm not sure if Doug would have hit the 5-5 with a diamond type bluff, but in any case, even if he did, he's still going to be hurting for bluffs on the river that does come. So Ginge calls, now they're heads up to the river. There's 20K in the pot, and Doug's got just over pot to play. So now I think Doug can do a bunch of different things here versus humans. I think that it's very unlikely for Ginge, even though he's a great player himself and he knows Doug's very capable. This is a spot when somebody leads into 3 other players on a board like this after flatting the big blind, that it's just going to be incredibly hard for Doug to have bluffs. He would have had to not 3-bet ace-jack offsuit, and then he would have had to bet. He has to wake up with the diamond combo of that hand, and then he has to have bet 70% into 3 guys. And now he has to follow through on the river. So let's just see which size he chooses. But I think in general, what we're seeing here is a spot where people will be really hurting for bluffs, but their range does want to be super polarized, because when you have the nut flush draw, if you have like ace 6 of diamonds here, you want to put all the money in and make Ginge have to call you with stuff like queen jack and every other flush that Ginge can have. When Doug does block that 2 pair, that Ginge can hero. Like some of Ginge's calls are going to be king 10, 9, 10. So Doug bets the medium big size. Ginge snap folds, and we're not necessarily really interested in the actual results. It is a good fold from Ginge there. But let's think about, what does Doug want to do here? I changed the colors so that we can see Doug's range in terms of red meaning stop or green meaning bet. So his bluffs here is just going to be exactly what we said. He's going to have ace jack with a diamond, and he's going to want to bluff that one. And then all the other hands are just the nut flushes, and he's going to have a little bit of that jack 10. But his hand technically wants to check, but jack 10 of diamonds wants to bet, so it doesn't really matter. He wants to bet that 4-4 because he's going to get called by some of these higher two pairs. But the hands that have a big card in them, like the queen 10, jack 10, really interfere with Ginge's calling range. So Ginge's going to want to call stuff like king, queen of diamonds. If he perceives that Doug is going to value bet queen jack suited every time, which it's very delicate. I think into three players behind, and the fact that Doug probably would have 3-bet queen jack suited a lot makes it less likely. So I think Ginge's hero call range does want to have probably a diamond in it, like king x queen of diamonds. And then he's just going to have a bunch of strong hands himself. He's not going to play many raises at all versus B70 into three people behind. So Ginge is going to have a bunch of stuff here. He's going to have sets. He's going to have two pair, and he's going to have straights and flushes himself, of course. And so I don't think he has to reach too far to defend. And I think that Doug's main bluff here is just ace of diamonds, jack of diamonds, ace random. And he would have had to reach pretty far on the turn to make that bet with like 5s or 7s with a diamond and then follow through. Otherwise, he'd have to turn a made hand into a bluff, which is an important concept to think about, because some of our opponents that don't have hard to find bluffs will just take a hand that is way too strong and then bluff with that, which can really mess up our strategies. But it's not that bad for their strategy themselves, because they don't know about the 5s or 7s turn stab there, or they don't think it's good. So then they get to the river and then they're like, oh, what do I have to bluff with here? I must just use a really strong hand because that's kind of all I have. So I think these are the important concepts to think about in this hand. I think when we think about Ginge's calling range and Doug's betting range, it's going to be really tight. And for people, it probably should be even tighter. Here he's calling the king queen. He's going to call, of course, his king 10. His king 9 was technically a call, and he snap folded it. So I think that kind of says something about how he perceives this spot versus anyone, just because I know that he probably thinks Doug is one of the more capable players in the game. And if he snap folded it versus Doug, he probably thinks that it's really hard to bluff there. And I tend to agree for sure. So you can pretty comfortably just not bluff catch in spots like this. Call your sets, maybe mix in a little bit at king 10, just because OOP never really bluffs with a 10 or a king. You don't block any bluffs with those hands. And then as soon as you get to maybe king queen versus some guys, if they ever have like an ace queen off in their range, you might block some bluffs with that one. Certainly the king jack is going to block some bluffs if you ever wake up with the diamond in your hand. So definitely a spot where both players should have really tight ranges. And in tight range spots, Ginge can basically just call the nuts here and be really confident that he's not going to leave any money on the table. So I think he did a great job with that one. Both players seem to play it pretty sharp. If I'm Doug, I'd be mixing a lot more checking just in case Ginge really believes that no one bluffs in that spot. Then you could induce some lighter value bets and then go for the check raise. I think that might get more money in the pot. But in any case, thought it was an interesting spot to talk about pre-flop and the flop mechanics. So thanks for watching, and stay tuned for one next video next week before we actually finally release Smash Live Cash.